My name is Billy and let's talk books. Hello. We have got a Stephen King reading vlog today. I have not filmed an introduction to this video, and so you are getting the shaky hand cam of a vlog, but that sets off the mood, right? Because this is going to be a reading vlog of two gigantic Stephen King novels, Salem's Lot and The Shining. I have only read two Stephen King novels up until this point. You can check out the videos on my channel. They are It was the first one I read, which I gave 4.75 stars and loved, and the second one was Misery, which I gave a 4.5 stars and also loved. So I'm very much anticipating this. I will say as well, this is going to be a full spoiler-filled video with lots of stuff spoiled. So if you have not read Salem's Lot or The Shining and you want to remain spoiler-free, I would suggest clicking away now. Just to give you a bit of information, all I knew about Salem's Lot going in was that it had something to do with vampires, and that was literally it. And my thoughts on the prologue when I first read it was that it was very intriguing. I was interested in the characters and how they got to this point. And also, I loved the newspaper articles about the town, and I was very much looking forward to getting another small town setting from Stephen King because I loved Derry so much. So let's get into it. So I've read like over halfway through Salem's Lot. I'm on page 414, so about here. And I'm loving this so far. I definitely have so many thoughts, so we're just going to get like straight into it. There's a few specific things that I want to talk about, one of them being the main character, Ben. So we are following Ben, who is a writer, and he has kind of come back to this town, Jerusalem's Lot, where he stayed as a young child for a few years, and he has come back to this town. He had quite a like strange supernatural experience that terrified him as a child when he went into the Marston House. And the Marston House is this like haunted house within the town, and when he was there he had like an interaction with the ghost of a man who hung himself in Marston House. His name is something Marston, but he decides to go back to this town and he wants to write a novel there. We've got another main character who's a writer, which I'm sensing is a bit of a theme in Stephen King. I think that so far I'm not the biggest fan of Ben as the protagonist, to be honest. I find him to be quite dull and bland. I think that there's not much to him, and he's quite like a shut off person emotionally. So like being inside of his head, I don't feel like there's much intrigue or information. It's just quite flat, I think. And I'm really not too much of a fan either of his relationship with Susan. So he develops this relationship with a girl called Susan, who is a graduate, I believe, and she's a fan of him as a writer. But it's really weird. Like when they first get introduced, he like says that she's really pretty and he asks her if she'll come with him for a drink. And then he finds out her age and she's about 25, 26. And he goes, "Oh, I thought you were a lot younger than that." And it says that he thought she was about 18. And I'm like, okay, Ben, this is weird. This is a bit odd. So I was a bit like, that's strange. And I think as well, the relationship between the two of them has felt a little bit insta-lovey. Like immediately they're like super attached. He's going to meet her family and they're like so invested in each other. And it's nice to see how like committed they are to each other and that they seem to really care for each other. But like they've only just met. So that feels a bit odd. And Susan as well as a character, I find her quite bland as well. And I think this is a shame because what I will say is that like every other character that I've read about in this novel has been fascinating. So many incredible characters. You've got these like really mysterious presence of the two people that have come into town to buy the furniture shop, Straker and Barlow, and they're really fascinating. Matt as well, the teacher in the town, is great. We have Mike Ryerson as well, who's really interesting. And you've just got like a lot of stuff about characters in the town that I feel like are much more interesting than Ben and Susan. So Ben and Susan themselves is kind of like making me not as invested as maybe I would be if we were following other characters. Because what I will say is I think maybe like my favorite parts of the novel so far have been when we're not specifically following the main characters. So there's this one chapter and it's like over 50 pages. It's chapter 3 and it's called The Lot. And you basically follow an entire entire day in this small town, but from loads of different perspectives. So you start like super early in the morning and you follow a guy who's delivering, and then you move on and you just learn more and more about characters all throughout the town. And it was so good. I was obsessed. And I'm really realizing that Stephen King's building of towns and of places and spaces is just incredible. In the same way that I totally was hooked by Derry, I'm becoming totally hooked by Salem's Lot as well. So that chapter, it was so long, but it was so good. I loved every single second of it. I described it in my notes as being almost like a paint by numbers in a way. I see it as almost you have all of these different colors, and slowly one by one the colors get filled in until you have this complete picture of a town. It just becomes so real and vivid in your head, and I'm just loving that so much. I love the space. I feel like already I'm super attached to and aware of exactly what Salem's Lot is, how it looks, the people that live there, and just everything about it. So I'm just loving that so far. I think I said this in my It review, but I can see again why Stephen King might get that criticism of there's just too much information, too many characters, too many facts, and it's hard to kind of keep track of the plot or anything like that. But to me, I'm just so satisfied with it. I feel like I'm getting every single piece of information that I need, and I love it. Like there was another part as well when we're talking about like kind of secrets that the town knows, and loads of secrets are like revealed to you about different people, and some of them you don't even know the characters or anything. But I think that Stephen King does this in a way where it's like there's so many different secrets and stuff that some are going to be like monumental to the story. Some feel like maybe they're totally irrelevant, and some feel like it's just kind of a passing thing that's kind of interesting but isn't like super relevant to the plot. But it makes me feel like I have to pay a lot of attention to everything. So it sucks me into the narrative, and I'm just really invested in reading that, because it's almost like he's describing multiple things but then throws in something that is really important. So it might be like, oh, I don't know, the sky is blue and the grass is green and birds can talk, and you're like, wait, birds can talk? What does that mean? So it's just, you're always wanting to pay attention. And I feel that way whenever we're following like the town or the other characters or learning information about the history. But then when I am with Susan and Ben and things like that, I get a little bit bored because I'm not as invested in them, and I don't particularly think there's much to them as characters. So it's like strange, because I'm almost like half of me gets like super invested and the pacing is great and I'm happy with all the information, and then part of me is like, oh, I'm a bit bored now, I don't really want to read this bit. So yeah, I think maybe just the main characters in this haven't been the best fleshed out so far, but I'm still loving it, and I'm obsessed with Salem's Lot the same way I was with Derry. So I'm just really glad that this is another novel that gives me so much information about a small town. I'll say again that similarly in other novels by Stephen King, there have been a few things that I found like really difficult to read. They've been really unsettling and uncomfortable, and that is like mainly to do with like the baby, Randy, and also some scenes with animals. There's been a few things that have just been really intense and uncomfortable and difficult, and I think that that's something I might have to get used to in Stephen King, because I'm definitely really susceptible to violence against children and animals, and it's just so hard to read. But I think that what Stephen King does super well, and I've noticed this, is even though his novels are horror and they do have supernatural elements to them, he makes it very, very clear that a lot of the time the real monsters are humanity and are the people and what people are capable of doing. And I think that that makes things almost more scary than if it was just purely supernatural. So I think he has a really good way of like blending the two of these things that make it just feel horrifying, really scary. There definitely have been a few moments in this when I've been genuinely terrified, and I think one of those was when Danny and Ralphie are walking and you just know something is there with them in the darkness, and that was so scary. And I really loved Danny and Ralphie and their relationship as siblings, so I was just like, oh my god, I really don't want anything to happen to them, but I just know that it's going to, and that was really terrifying. I also think that the scene when Danny has come back and he has been transformed into a vampire and he appears floating outside a second story window, like not holding on to anything, the visual in my head when I was reading that, I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. And I think this might be the first horror novel that I've read where I've been home alone at nighttime and I've actually been like, I'm a little bit scared. Like, what if there's something in my bathroom when I walk in there and like I have to turn the lights on and I'm like, okay, it's fine. Like, stop being an idiot, Billy. But I haven't felt that way since I was a kid, for sure. I mean, this is another theme that King talks about a lot, where it's like, as a kid, you are more likely to believe in horror and in supernatural things, whereas as an adult, you rationalize things. And I think most of the time I definitely walk around like, oh, there's nothing in my house, everything's fine. And then I was reading this and I was like, but what if there's something there? What if there's a vampire? It was just, yeah, it's definitely gotten to me in the eeriness. I've noticed a lot more similarities as well between this and It, and I loved It so much. But I definitely think that they have that same vibe of like a supernatural occurrence happening in a small town. And the difference I feel so far is that with It felt a lot more horrific and fantastical and in your face, like with the clown, with Pennywise, and with the murders of children and how like intense it was. Whereas this one has this kind of like creeping to it. It's like this eeriness and this unsettling feeling that just something isn't right, and you're slowly understanding, because we went so many pages without actually meeting any vampires, anything supernatural. Like the only supernatural thing really was when Ben recalls seeing that ghost in Marston House. But even that, like, he tries to rationalize away and you're like, well, I don't know, like it probably is real, but it could not be real. So like there's a lot of things where it's just like a setup of like something just feels off about this place. And I think that with It, you're focusing on children. And like I just said, there's this idea that like children are able to see things and understand things and make sense of things that maybe adults will rationalize or try to see logic in. And so the two tones feel very significant in the fact that in this, we're mainly following an adult perspective, and in It, we're mainly following children. So with It, it's immediately known to you that like something supernatural and creepy is happening. Whereas in this, it's like, oh, what's going on? And I just feel really uncomfortable. So those two tones feel very different, but both work very well. I also wanted to talk about the name of Salem's Lot. So it's actually Jerusalem's Lot, but it's also called Salem's Lot. And I thought that that was a really interesting name because you have a lot of connotations there with religion, but also with witchcraft. So you've got that kind of like spiritual and supernatural intertwining even in the name of the town. And I think that those two things are like really like tied together. I know that we have Father Callahan coming up as well. There definitely feels like there's this little bit of mixing between supernatural and spiritual and religious, and it's just really eerie and scary. We also had like talks of like deals with the devil and satanic rituals and sacrifices as well. So that is tying in again, and we're kind of seeing like the vampires as the devil. So you've just got that really interesting mixture between reality and supernatural, and I'm loving that so far. I love how slow burn this has felt as well. I've always loved a slow build up where you really can kind of settle yourself in. You know that something big is coming, but it's taking you a while to get there. I've always loved that, but I feel like it has to be done really well. It needs to be engaging the whole time that you are reading, because otherwise it just gets a little bit boring. And I think Stephen King does this super well, but I will say that I definitely have noticed a few pacing issues in this one. And I'm wondering, because I know this is one of his first novels, so maybe a few things weren't quite like fully formed, because I feel like in It, I was never bored. And I think it's because there was the combination of fantastic characters, world building, and plot at the same time. Whereas I feel like this one has fantastic world building. It has some really great characters, but some that I find not to be as well fleshed out or developed. And then the plot is kind of a little bit up and down. So whilst I'm really, really still enjoying this, and I can see the magic of Stephen King in it, I definitely think that I'm not enjoying it as much as I did with It. And there's a few things that are just not quite working for me. Anytime we had to go back to Ben, I was kind of annoyed, and I didn't really want to read about him. And Susan as well, I was just kind of like, ugh, I don't care. And so the bit that I've just got to where Susan and Mark, who is a young boy who is also kind of investigating what's going on, they go to the Marston house to try and see what's happening there, and they get confronted. And so in the end, Susan doesn't actually escape. She gets taken by the vampires. And I was honestly quite happy about this choice. Part of me feels a little bit annoyed because she's like the only female character in here, and she wasn't given much like capability or strength to her character. So that was a little bit frustrating, and now I'm like, well, what other women do we have in here? But I do think maybe this is a problem that Stephen King might have a little bit with not giving too much depth to the female characters. So I was a bit upset that she's gone already, but at the same time, I'm like, well, I much prefer Susan as a vampire than I do as a love interest, because as a love interest, she's talked down to, she's treated kind of like a child, and there's not much else to her other than the fact that she really is into Ben. So I'm almost like happy that she didn't get away and is turned into a vampire. And I'm really hoping that she gets a lot more page time and she has a lot of purpose as a vampire. That would really make me happy. I'm anticipating that. But honestly, I feel like because I'm not as interested in Ben as a character, I kind of have reached the point where I'm rooting for the vampires. I'm very much just wanting a full infestation of vampires in this town. And what I'm kind of anticipating as like the climax and the next part of the novel is that just slowly, one by one, the entire town is getting turned into vampires, and there's just going to be like a full-on infestation of vampires. And I'm kind of rooting for the vampires. Is that weird? I'm just having so much fun with it. I mean, I love Matt. I'm really enjoying Matt. I think he's a great character. But yeah, in terms of Ben, I'm like, yeah, I kind of just want to see vampires take over this town. I think there was a lot of really interesting comparison between vampirism and plagues as well. It seems almost like the idea of vampirism is being treated as a plague of the town, and the first part of the plague has come to town and is slowly infecting the rest of the town. And that imagery and that kind of like progression of the narrative is just so fun. I'm loving that. And so I'm just like, yeah, give me all the vampires. I want all the vampires. I want everybody to be a vampire and for this entire town to just be overtaken. I remember at the beginning in that news article that it was like the entire town has just vanished kind of thing, like it's seen as like a ghost town, and that was one of the things I really pulled out of the prologue because it was so interesting to me and it was creepy. So I'm like, I really don't know what's going to happen. Is it going to be that everybody has become a vampire so nobody is aware of it? Or is it going to be that like the vampires are taken out and everybody kind of flees the town? I don't really know, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. Again, as I said with some of the other novels of King, I definitely still think there's quite a bit of fat phobia and sexism and racism present. I'm not saying that King himself is exhibiting these things, but I think that it's just very reminiscent of the time period. That you have like underage girls being sexualized, you have a lot of talk about women's breasts, you have a lot of talk about big fat characters being like horrible people, and it's definitely off-putting. I have to kind of just accept it's a part of King's work and it's a product of the time, but I do still want to pay attention to it because it's definitely not something that I think works, and it leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth every time I'm reading something like that. So I think it's worth mentioning. I've enjoyed a few of the conversations about like how the vampires operate as well, and how they almost like leave you feeling completely at ease so that they can attack. And that idea of like almost being hypnotized by the vampires so that you open your home to them and you allow them inside is really eerie and creepy, because then it's like, how do you even fight them off at that point, because they are getting inside of your brain and making you susceptible to being their food or their prey or whatever. So yeah, I'm enjoying that. But that is where I have gotten to so far. I'm really enjoying Salem's Lot. I definitely think that there are times where I find it to be a little bit slow and the characters are not the best. I'm not super invested in them. Well, definitely the main characters. There are a few other characters that I am invested in. I haven't really talked about Mark as well, and I do really like Mark, but I definitely think he's written a little bit too old for the age that he's supposed to be. But yeah, so far the town and the creepiness and the vampires is really fun. I'm very much enjoying it, and I will give you another update when I'm finished the novel. Okay, so I'm pleased to say I have finished Salem's Lot, and I have a lot of thoughts. Starting off straight away, I told you that I finished on page 414, and I was starting up again, and immediately I came across this amazing quote that I just had to read out to you. And it's kind of to do with illness and the body and the human psychology towards illness in their own bodies. But let me just read it out to you. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. Callahan found that the common first reaction to news of cancer, strokes, heart attacks, or the failure of some major organ was one of betrayal. The patient was astounded to find that such a close, and up to now at least, fully understood friend as one's own body could be so sluggard as to lie down on the job. The reaction which followed close on the heels of the first was the thought that a friend who would let one down so cruelly was not worth having. The conclusion that followed these reactions was that it didn't matter if this friend was worth having or not. One could not refuse to speak to one's traitorous body, or get up a petition against it, or pretend that one was not at home when it called. The final thoughts in this hospital bed train of reasoning was the hideous possibility that one's body might not be a friend at all, but an enemy implacably dedicated to destroying the superior force that had used it and abused it ever since the disease of reason set in. Like, oh my god. I feel like there are times in each of Stephen King's novels where he throws in these like philosophical or moral arguments that are just kind of like mind-blowing and describe things in such an amazing way. And that was one that I just had to point out because it was so good. But anyway, let's talk about the rest of this novel. I definitely feel mixed feelings about it, but I will say that a lot of it is very, very positive. I feel the same way as I did in the first part, that the town and the vampires and just the atmosphere and everything about it was just fantastic. I talked as well about how I just really was kind of rooting for a total infestation of vampires, which I very much got and I was very happy about. The town slowly being taken over like person by person until almost there was nobody on the streets anymore, because during the day they were all hiding, was just so amazing. I loved it so much. And there were scenes in it where they were walking around trying to find where the vampires were hiding during the day and looking in all these dark spots and just seeing bodies there, and it was just genuinely terrifying, but like in the most fun way. Like I had so much fun reading about that. I did have a thought though, like wouldn't they eventually just run out of food? Like it doesn't quite make sense to me, because if all the vampires are turned once they're fed on and then they become vampires themselves, surely over time it would just be like a plague of vampires until all that is remaining is vampires, but then they don't have any food. Where's the regulation? Like in a lot of vampire stuff that I've seen before, like they don't turn everybody. Whereas this, I loved how everyone just slowly was turned into vampires. But it was also interesting to me because it's like, well, then where are they going to get their food source? I don't know if that was ever answered, but it was something that I was thinking about. To be honest though, like just reading this whole novel just made me like super into vampires again. I loved vampires when I was younger, and just the whole history, mythology of vampires is so interesting to me. I really wanted to go back like immediately and like pick up some of the classic vampire novels. I really want to read Dracula and Carmilla and some of the old school vampire novels, but also those kind of like historical retellings of like lore and things like that. You know, when you read like a history of the vampire and you see how the figure and the mythos of the vampire has evolved over time, because the idea of vampires and creatures, you know, sucking on human blood and having this kind of thirst is really, really ancient. And I would love to pick up some books that kind of walk you through the history of the vampire in the human imagining. And if you have any of those, please recommend them to me, because I love things like that, about all the occult and vampires and witches and just everything that kind of teaches you about how it's like developed over time and become part of our culture. I find that super fascinating. So yeah, this novel just again immediately made me want to learn more and more and more about the vampires. There were a couple of moments in this where I got frustrated that I didn't get to see moments. Like we had a couple of fade to blacks, which really stressed me out. One of them was the confessional scene, and Father Callahan wants them to go through this purification ritual almost, so they are to confess so that they become pure and are able to fight the vampires. But we never get to see these confessions, and I was like, this would be such a great insight into some of these characters, and particularly Ben, because I felt like, again, we didn't get too much of his like inner workings and his inner thoughts and emotions. So I would have loved to see his confession, and I was like, no, when it faded to black. That was upsetting. And the second one was right at the end of the novel, and I will talk about the ending a little bit in more detail, but the fact that it was like, oh, let's go and hunt down the vampires, fade to black, that really upset me, because I wanted this big on action Van Helsing takedown of the vampires, and I never got to see it. And I wanted it before, when they were kind of going after Barlow, and then I wanted it again when they came back, and I never got it. So those two moments kind of left me feeling a little bit upset. I do think that there is merit to how it was told, but yeah, I think that these couple of moments would have been more impactful if we got to actually see what happened afterwards. I talked about as well that I was really looking forward to Susan playing a big role as a vampire. Well, that didn't happen. And to be honest, I do feel like Susan was given quite a disservice in this novel. I think that she was kind of just a placeholder character. And even when she was sacrificed as kind of the maiden to the love interest who could then make him go through this emotional journey of losing somebody, she was then immediately staked and she didn't actually get to play a big role as a vampire. And I was really upset about this. I think that this is a good time to talk about the fact that I definitely still thought by the end that the suffering of this novel was the three main characters being, I would say, Ben, Susan, and Mark. I think all three of these characters felt a little bit off. I have kind of talked about this already, so I don't want to go too much into it, but Ben, I just wasn't a fan of. He annoyed me even more in this part. Susan, I was upset at the disservice that was given to her. And Mark just felt a little bit too Gary Sue and very much older than his age. So I wasn't as connected to him as a real character. However, I will say that some of the side characters like Jimmy and Matt and Mike Ryerson, and especially Eva and Ed as well. I had like such a fondness for Eva and Ed and their little tragic romance that it really upset me when they got turned into vampires. There was some great side characters, but I think that the main characters in this one just weren't quite fleshed out enough for me, and that definitely pulled down my enjoyment of it. I think that the pacing issues did also continue. There definitely were points where I felt like it was dragging and I was getting a bit bored, and I also noticed that kind of the structure felt a little bit confusing because you almost have like three big chapters of the novel, but it didn't make too much sense to me what each of them was signifying. It wasn't like a setup, middle, and ending in that kind of a way. I just felt that it was a little bit hard to follow and the threads weren't as like intricately melded as I would have liked. I think that this novel didn't do the best of jobs of tying everything together and making it all make sense to me. So at times I found myself being a bit confused and I wasn't really sure where we were going. I do, however, want to give credit to some absolutely incredible scenes within this. There are so many that like visually stick out in my head. This novel had so many of them. There were so many incredible scenes that just felt alive in my mind. Some of them that I want to talk about are, again, them being seen at windows and kind of scratching to get inside. That was really, really vivid. I've already talked about it, but again, all the vampires hiding during the day, that was horrifying. There was this one scene as well with two of the van removal guys that were sent to take a box to the Marston house and take it down into the basement. Just the palpable terror in these two grown men as they were taking this box and going into this house and going into the basement was so intense that you just like fully felt it, and it made you terrified of what was going on because the characters were so terrified, and it was written so well. There was also this one scene of all the vampire kids on a bus going to the bus drivers, and he was like a horrible person and he was really cruel and he'd like kick them off and make them walk for miles and stuff. And so this scene where he like goes onto this bus and all of the vampire kids are just there waiting for him. Oh my god, it was amazing. So good. I do think that some of the scenes that were meant to be impactful did slightly miss the mark though, and specifically I found this with Barlow as a character, because to me all of the other vampires were like infinitely more terrifying than Barlow himself was, and he's like the kingpin of the vampires. He is the head vampire, daddy vampire as you are. He's created everybody in this town, but he wasn't that scary to me. He felt a little bit cartoonish. He was a bit of a cartoon villain, and even when he like came in, and I know he kills Mark's parents and that was quite insane, but he just never really felt that scary. So the scenes that had him in it weren't as impactful to me as some of the other ones. The final scene as well, where they were building up to this battle and they were trying to find where Barlow was hiding so that they could take him out, was stressing me out. That entire day, genuinely, I was losing my mind, going crazy over how much time they were taking doing things and all the little side trips they were going on. They went to find where vampires were hiding, but they didn't have any stakes with them. They were just going to mark X's on where vampires were. And I'm like, In the time that it has taken you to wander around looking for vampires, you could have been going and just taking them out like one by one. Why are you doing this? I felt like they were wasting so much time on totally insignificant stuff, and it was stressing me out because I was like, oh my God, it's going to be dark soon. You are done when darkness comes. They are going to come for you. So why are you not going about this with some haste? The fire was just not there, and I was like, what is going on? It's stressing me out so much. They went to look for Barlow without telling Ben or getting a stake first. And when they finally do get to Barlow, they drag the coffin from one room into another room. And it takes ages, and he's like waking up because the sun is setting. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just do it there while he's still asleep? So then when the final battle actually came and they have to like stake him, he's kind of coming into consciousness and he's fighting back. And you're just like, you could have done this already. It was infuriating. Don't get me wrong though. I do think that the writing and the way it was dragged out was totally gripping my emotions, because I was like, what? Hurry up! I was getting super stressed. So that worked very well, and my emotions were very much invested in this moment, but it annoyed me. I did want that like full Van Helsing takedown here though. I would have loved so much if they were going about the town just taking them all out one by one, and then we ended with the final boss battle of them needing to take out Barlow. It would have been more fun, whereas this was like they didn't even get any of the other vampires. They were just kind of wandering around aimlessly, and then they just about managed to get Barlow, but then they had to flee town. That choice just was a little bit strange to me. I think I would have just liked it a different way. The imagery of the dead town though, we saw it in the prologue with this article about the ghost town, and you see it as they're walking around, and again it's just this feeling of something is there but nothing's there. It's terrifying. It had like all the hairs of my body standing on end. But yeah, like I said with this takedown, how I wanted it to kind of be a big Van Helsing action scene, we didn't get this at the end either. And as much as I did like the ending, the idea is that they're gonna flush out the town with fire and then go and take out all the vampires, I would have liked to either have seen that and that be the ending, we see them finally kind of reclaim the town, or I would have liked it to be that they never go back at all and it's just left there as this kind of ghost town and this scary story where people avoid the town at all costs, and you know that it's just full of vampires that only come out at night. I feel like either of those two endings would have felt a little bit more impactful than what we did get in the end. All the mixed media that we get throughout this as well, I really enjoy. I know that that is kind of something that Stephen King likes to play around with, and I really, really liked it in this the same way that I have in other ones of his stories. I love getting articles about kind of what's going on and that period of time when they were away from the town and all the people that had either kind of gone missing or reported really scary stuff happening, people coming to their windows and people had moved in but then immediately fled. It just builds up this kind of idea of the town as something to be avoided, which is just great. I want to talk a little bit about Ben again as well, because I said he really annoyed me in this part. In the first half, I was kind of like, I mean, he's a bit lame. He's okay. Like, he's decent enough, I guess. It's a bit strange how he's gone after a younger girl and thought that she was almost underage. That's a bit odd, but like, he's okay. Like, he's fine. Whereas in this part, I'm like, he actually kind of was an asshole. There are these points where he's like, oh, I'm convinced that today's going to be my final day. I'm going to my death. But hey, let me make sure that this child comes along with me. And when he tells me that he's too scared and he doesn't want to do it, I'm going to manipulate and force him into it. But also with the full knowledge that if we do not succeed, I'm going to shoot and kill him. That was so wild. What are you doing, Ben? He really annoyed me. I was like, I kind of hate you a little bit. I'm not going to lie. So all in all with this one, I felt a bit conflicted by it because, like Derry, Salem's Lot has got a huge place in my heart. I love this town. I'm obsessed. I'm absolutely obsessed. I'm so happy that I read it. The vampires and the town, it just won completely. And I don't think I'm going to be able to stop thinking about it. I'm going to want to go and look into all the details about Salem's Lot the same way that I did with Derry. And I'd love more stories with Salem's Lot featured. It just has a living heart of its own. And I love that so much. I really enjoyed all the concepts of the vampires as well and how they kind of played out in this novel. However, the pacing was off for me and the characters weren't my favorite, at least the main characters weren't my favorite. So I don't know how to feel about it. Part of me is like, well, I feel more attached to this than I did to Misery. And I rated Misery a 4.5. Fantastic. But this one has more of what I love in terms of atmosphere and setting and history. Whereas I do feel like Misery had much better characters and better pacing and plotting of the story. I almost feel like this one is more my cup of tea and something that I like more, but I don't think it's as good as Misery. So I feel a little bit torn on it, but I am going to give it a 4.25. I was initially going to give it a 4 because I do think that there were a few big issues in this, but my obsession with the town and the way that I think Stephen King's world building and crafting of these spaces is just second to none. It just has to raise it for me. I've never seen anything like it. I've never known something to just be so real and feel so lived in a way that it almost gives me the same vibe of an entire fantasy world in just one town. It's so amazing. So yes, 4.25 for Salem's Lot. I thought it was fantastic. I definitely think it had its problems, but it was so good. And after I finished it, I did actually read the introduction. I used to read the introduction before I read books, and then I realized that a lot of the time people spoil them in the introduction, which makes no sense to me. But I've learned to read the introduction afterwards. And there were a few things that I wanted to talk about in there as well. First of all, I just loved Stephen King's observations. He comes across as so funny and witty and self-aware. I just really enjoy the way he addresses you. And he writes in this tone that it's like, I'm talking directly to you as a person to person. And I love that so much. But he kind of reflects a lot on exactly how I felt about this novel. And I wanted to read out this one particular quote because it summed it up so much. And I was like, yes, I could not agree more. So he says, I think Salem's Lot, for all its flaws, is one of the good ones. One of the scary ones. If you've never heard it before, let me tell it to you now. And if you have, let me tell it to you again. So turn off the television. In fact, why don't you turn off all the lights, except for the one over your favourite chair, and we'll talk about vampires here in the dim. I think I can make you believe in them, because while I was working on this book, I believed in them myself. And honestly, that immediately made me go and read the prologue again, because I was like, okay, yeah, tell me, even though I've just finished it. He has this warmth and this invitation to his writing, and I appreciate that he acknowledges the fact that Salem's Lot might not be a perfect book, but there's just something here that is it. And I totally agree with that. He kind of said as well in the introduction that there was something about seeing the scars of a craftsman new in his trade, but there was a beauty to it. And I totally agree with you. The fact that this was his second novel published as well, I think, is absolutely insane. I wonder how old he was at the time. The fact that he could accomplish something like this so early on in his career is crazy to me, because while there were some things that didn't work properly, just some things were done so above your average author that it just works anyway. I also really now want to read his nonfiction memoir, the one on writing, because I feel like I could just learn so much from Stephen King, and he seems like just a really cool person, and I love the way that he writes, especially that nonfiction style in his introduction. I think I'd really enjoy reading that, so I'd love to pick that up. Final thing, at the end of my copy of Salem's Lot, we have a couple of short stories linked to the Salem's Lot world. I think they might be from other anthologies of his, but I went ahead and read them anyway because I was like, yeah, sure, let's have a little bit more in the world. The first one was One for the Road, and this follows two people who are in a bar on the outskirts of Salem's Lot. They're in kind of the next town over, and a man comes in and is asking for them for help because his car broke down and his wife and child are in this car, and they're all like, oh my god, not in Salem's Lot, right? You can't go there. And they end up trying to help him and stuff, and they go into Salem's Lot and vampirism ensues. But it was great. I loved it. It was an absolutely fantastic addition to this story. I was really intrigued as to how the neighboring towns would react and respond to Salem's Lot. So it was just so much fun getting to see that. So I really, really enjoyed that. The next one was Jerusalem's Lot. And this one, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't really as big of a fan of. I didn't really get the point of it. I kind of was a bit lost in what it was trying to say about you know, how Barlow came to be, Marston House and the cults and where Jerusalem's Lot is kind of built on. Maybe somebody can kind of explain that to me or point me in a direction or something. But the way the story was written, it just wasn't that engaging for me. I felt like it was a little bit strange, and it didn't feel like in the same universe. It felt a bit more abstract in a way. So I wasn't really a fan of that, but it was fun all the same. Yeah, that is going to be that for Salem's Lot. I very much enjoyed it, 4.25, and I just love Stephen King. I think that he's so brilliant, and every time I read one of his novels so far, it's been an absolute blast. I've only read 3, so I mean, I'm not one to like hugely judge considering the size of his catalogue, but so far they are all really working for me. Next up, we are going to read The Shining. I've already read a little bit of it. I'm just making my way through. I think I'm about 30 pages in. I've made a few tabs, but yeah, we're going to be reading The Shining. All I really know about The Shining is that it's set in a hotel, the Overlook Hotel. There's something about ghosts. All I know is kind of big scenes from the movie. Here's Johnny with the like axe in the door and the twins, although I think that the novel is very different to the film, and I think I know that Stephen King really hated the film. So that is pretty much all I know about The Shining, and that it's just a masterpiece of horror. So I'm quite excited for it, and we're going to get going, and I will come back to you with my next midpoint update on The Shining. So I have made it to the midpoint of The Shining now. We are halfway through, and so far this has been really, really good as well. I'm really just finding that Stephen King just really works for me, and there's just so much in this that I think is done so well. And I looked as well, and this is his third published work. So actually Salem's Lot and The Shining were published like straight after each other, which is really cool that I've picked the two of them to do in this like video together. That was totally by accident. I just went into bookshops, and first I picked up Salem's Lot and then I picked up The Shining because they're both so iconic. But I love that I'm reading them at the same time. Let's get started with my thoughts on the first half of this novel. So if you don't know what The Shining is about, this basically follows Jack, who is going with his family, Wendy and Danny, to the Overlook Hotel. He has recently been fired from his job as a high school teacher. He's managed to get this position as the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, and basically what the caretaker does is they go throughout the winter season, the off season, when the Overlook is snowed in, because it is located on this mountain ridge in the middle of nowhere, and during winter the snow falls down and blocks any entrance or exit to the Overlook Hotel, so they need somebody there to maintain the building basically. So they are going to stay at the Overlook for the winter period. I kind of want to break it up into a few different sections, so I'm going to talk about the writing and the techniques that Stephen King uses. The characters will come next, and then also my kind of like thoughts about the main plot points and what's been happening so far. So let's get started with kind of the writing. And honestly, I feel like this is just going to be me praising Stephen King for however long this is going to be, because it is so excellent. And the fact that this is one of his first novels is honestly astonishing to me. This is done so well. In terms of the writing, I feel like it's strange because right at the beginning, you're almost told what to expect from this novel. There's a lot of foreshadowing, and it's not done subtly. You're very much under the impression that like, okay, they're gonna go to this hotel, and we're told right at the beginning that the manager doesn't like to hire families because the previous caretaker was a man with his wife and 2 daughters, and he ended up murdering them all and then going crazy and killing himself as well. So he doesn't like the idea of having another family. But right from the beginning, you are almost told what is going to be happening. You know that this has happened to the previous family. Jack kind of says, oh, well, you know, you don't have to worry about that with me. So we're going to have to worry about that with him as well. You kind of can tell that he is going to slowly lose his mind, have what is described as cabin fever, which is this psychological experience where when you are kept locked inside an isolated space with only a certain amount of people, you end up feeling kind of violent and angry towards those people over small things. So you know that this is what's going to happen. There's also some talk about the boiler and how Jack basically has to make sure that this really ancient boiler keeps at a certain level because it's very old, and if it gets over a certain amount, it could explode basically. So he has to go down there a few times a day and turn it down because it slowly creeps upwards, and he needs to make sure that doesn't happen. So I feel like the end of this novel is going to be Jack going crazy, killing his family, and the boiler exploding. And I feel like we get told this right from the beginning. And it's crazy because the writing style of having all of this foreshadowing happening has not detracted whatsoever from the intensity and the fear and the hope that you get while reading it. Like, you don't want it to happen, but you know that it's going to, and it's still really, really scary, even though you already have the answer. And I feel like this is a really great technique in horror of being like, well, what did you expect? Like, we always try to convince ourselves that it's not actually going to happen. We can be optimistic and hope that our heroes make it out of this and it's not actually going to go down the way that we suspect it's going to go down. So it almost is toying with your emotions in a way, because in some ways it's more scary to have no idea what's going to happen, but then in other ways it's more scary to know the inevitability of what's going to happen, but still really hope against it and hate watching it unfold, because you're just watching it like with your fingers over your eyes going, oh my God, it's happening. But is it going to happen? It's really good. I'm really enjoying that part of the writing. I also love, love, love this setting as well. This idea of this massive hotel that is supposed to be for loads and loads of guests, but it is completely isolated, cut off from the world by snow, and there's just the three of them that are going to be living there. What a great image and just this terrifying setting. I feel like being in the middle of nowhere and being isolated without anybody being able to come and assist you or help you is just terrifying. It's a terrifying prospect. And just, I don't know, this idea of a hotel which is supposed to be full and supposed to have lots of people being empty and having so much space. They kind of talked about it with the dining room, that they don't like eating in the dining room because there's hundreds of tables, but only one of them is full. That again, it just, the imagery of that, and then the overlook as well as a whole with all the rooms that nobody is using. It's just really unsettling, and it's done so, so well. I also am really enjoying King's technique of the unreliable narrator, because I definitely don't trust Jack in how he thinks or what he's presenting as facts. There's been a few moments when he's thinking about his past, and there's specifically two that I'm thinking of. One is the incident that he was fired for. So he basically beat a kid to a pulp and was fired for that. But he talks about the incident and how he was placed on the debate team, but he would stutter, and then Jack wanted to get rid of him, so he said, you can't be on the team anymore, and then this kid slashed his tires and he beat the crap out of him basically. But he talks about this and he's like, oh, I didn't have any hatred for the boy, and I didn't turn down the timer so that his time ran out quicker than he was, because the kid is like really angry about this, and he's like, you didn't give me my full amount of time. Jack's like, no, I didn't do that, and I don't have any bad feelings towards him. I don't know why I did that. But then at other times it feels like he genuinely despises this child, and he still does. There's a moment when Danny stutters after being terrified by something, and Jack gets super angry at him, and it's just like, whoa, dude, like, why are you so irate about a stutter? So it's very clear to me that this was a big problem, and he had a lot of anger towards his child, but he's not telling us that he did. And there's another moment as well, basically when he decides to stop drinking because he's a recovering alcoholic. He stops drinking because him and his friend, who is also an alcoholic, get into a car accident and they run over this bike. And the bike that they run over, they go and check and they look everywhere for a body, because it's a child's bike and it's been left in the middle of the road. So they're like, well, there must be a child on it. But they look everywhere and apparently they don't find anything. It was just a bike left in a strange place. But again, I'm like, I don't believe that, to be honest. I don't know if he's telling me the truth, because why would just hitting a bike be the thing that snaps him out of his alcoholism, when 3 months before that he literally broke his own child's arm in a fit of rage and still didn't immediately stop, which is crazy, by the way. But it was this bike. So I'm like, is he hiding that they did actually kill a child in this car accident and he's not being honest about it? I think it's good though, because it just makes me question everything I'm reading. I don't know how much of Jack's inner monologue to believe, and I don't know which parts of his behaviors and his thoughts are him, or are cabin fever, or are him recovering from alcoholism, or is the hotel or a supernatural presence infecting his mind. So there's all of these like components that just make everything so confusing and hard to trust, but in the best way, because you're always on the edge of your seat. You don't know what's going to happen and what's real and what's not. It's just amazing. The history and atmosphere, again, I just think King is just a master of space and setting. The descriptions of the Overlook and all the history of it, and how different bad, violent events have happened here. It's just so eerie and the whole place feels so vivid. I can see why the Overlook Hotel is such a like staple of horror. It makes so much sense. It's great. There's also a lot to do with the writing style where there's loads of breaks between sentences, almost like poetry, with bracketed thoughts in the middle of them. The character will be thinking of something and then a side thought will come in and then he'll carry on with his thought. So that's done a lot, but there's also loads of random facts thrown in that you don't know what they mean and some sentences that come out of nowhere and you don't know if it's from the character's mind or from the narrator or whatever it's coming from. But there was a great example in here that I wanted to talk about. I literally just read it, but it's on page 249 in my copy. He's talking about his past, what has happened with his father. It says, his own voice mewling drunkenly, "Danny, you okay, Doc? Oh God, your poor sweet arm." And that face transformed into Mama's dazed face rising up from below the table, punching and bleeding, and Mama was saying, "From your father, I repeat, an enormously important announcement from your father. Please stay tuned or tune immediately to the Happy Jack frequency. Repeat, tune immediately to the Happy Hour frequency. I repeat," a slow dissolved, disembodied voices echoing up to him as if along an endless cloudy hallway. "Things keep getting in the way, dear Tommy. Medic, are you here? I've been sleepwalking again, my dear. It's the inhuman monsters that I fear. Excuse me, Mr. Ullman, but isn't this the office with its file cabinets?" And like there's this whole kind of just completely chaotic, almost manic flashing of thoughts and previous memories or writing that you've heard of in the past. And this way of writing, and it's slowly getting more and more so, is really kind of reflecting this unraveling of what is happening in the minds of the protagonists in the hotel and how it is all just building and building into this crescendo where everything is completely all over the place. There's no solid or trustworthy avenue to follow. It's not structured and nice and neat. It's just absolutely all over the place. And that adds such a tension to the narrative of not knowing what's going to happen and when Jack is going to snap and when everything's just going to go crazy. It's such a great technique. The pacing as well, adding to this, is just really interesting to me because, like I say, you're kind of given the climax at the very beginning. So you kind of know that it's going to go from here to here. And you already know that, but it doesn't make it any less frightening. But it's also got these ups and downs, and chaotic things happening while still climbing on this crescendo. So it's almost like up, down, whilst always going up. And you just can never settle. And I think that there are so many writing techniques in this novel that can be followed when it comes to horror, because it doesn't give you a moment's respite. And when you do get that moment's respite and you're like, oh, it seems okay, are they good? Then it just goes bad again and you're always on the edge of your seat waiting for something to happen. Let's talk a little bit about the characters. So we've got kind of like 4 main characters in this, and the first one to talk about is Jack himself. So Jack is a very fascinating character and very good to follow in this, but there's so much to him that I find interesting. Immediately as soon as we meet him, I'm like, well, I have a lot of problems with Jack because he's a recovering alcoholic, which is great. But in the past, his alcoholism has led him to lose control of his temper. He's even broke his 3-year-old son's arm, and that didn't even stop him drinking. He doesn't have the self-control. He's beaten up this child and he's lost their jobs. His wife and son are bearing the brunt of him being out every single night, getting wasted, and them just feeling unsafe in their home. But at the same time, you can also see that he's really trying now, and he does want to make things better, and he really does love his wife and son. That is quite obvious to me. So there's like parts of me when I'm reading where I do feel for him and I have sympathy for him, and it's sad and tragic almost, but then at the same time I'm like, but he's not learning. He's still allowing his temper to get the best of him. He's still making these bad choices where his family are concerned because of his own ego, because of his own pride, and because he's not actually dealing with his issues. He's just blaming his issues on other people, and he's not able to keep control of himself. And I hate that, because then what is it, your wife and your child that suffers because of your own lack of ability to take care of yourself? Like, that bothers me. But it's very realistic, isn't it? He feels like a very real character. I just never know where to sit with him. But then as the novel is going on as well, he's slowly getting more and more violent and aggressive and short-tempered. But I don't know how much of that is the hotel, and how much of it is the isolation, and how much of it is him just not being able to change. So I never know how much blame to place on him, how much to root for him. But at the end of the day, all I know is that Danny and Wendy are innocent of any of this. So Jack is the one that I'm placing the blame on here, even though he's trying. So it's really difficult, but I think that's what makes a great character, is when you don't know how to feel about them and you can see both good and bad in their character. Part of me feels like he is just always looking for somebody else to blame for his own failures and his own shortcomings. And even though he does have these moments where he has a kind of self-loathing, or he even thinks of suicide at certain points, so you can tell that he's really struggling, and he does ultimately know that it's his own fault. But instead of accepting that and dealing with it, and also dealing with the trauma of his past and his upbringing, he just finds ways to push that to the side and get angry and blame it on others, which again is very realistic, but not something that's very sympathetic. It feels more pathetic, to be honest. Like, I get it, but at the same time, you have to reach a certain point where you are able to take accountability for yourself, and he's not doing that. So it makes me really frustrated with him. Later on, he just starts becoming really horrible as well. There was a scene when he went down to the public library and he gets a headache, and Wendy comes in to see how he is and what's going on, and he just thinks the most awful things about her in his head, and then really snaps at her and says some horrible stuff to her, and she's really taken aback by it. And again, I'm like, where is this coming from? What is causing this to happen? But it's terrifying, because honestly, I think, again, I talked about in my Salem Slot review, but what Stephen King does that makes his horror so horrifying is use his humans as the monsters. And there's some great lines in this about human monsters, and how something, I can't remember what it was, but it's like inhuman places make human monsters or something like that. And that is really what is happening in this. And it's terrifying, because honestly, is there anything more scary than a violent, angry man alone with his family? That to me is one of the most terrifying things that you can have and that you can imagine. And it's a very real thing that we deal with just everywhere in the world. So it's just so terrifying having these thoughts slowly creeping in. Oh, I've just remembered another writing technique as well that was amazing. So he talks about the boiler, and the boiler is described as having this creeping quality to it. You have to always go down to it and turn it back down, because it will be creeping up. And you know how I talked about the structure and the pacing of this novel, and how it keeps going upwards, but then it comes back down and going upwards. And it feels exactly like the boiler. The narrative starts creeping up in intensity, but then it gets turned back down, and then it starts creeping again, and you have to turn it back down. And all the while it's just building and building. And I think Stephen King does this a lot, where he gives you kind of like a metaphor for how he is telling the story, and this was the one in this, and it was so fantastic. When I thought about that, I was like, God, it is genius, to be honest, describing the boiler as the style of your story. I talked about this specifically in my Misery video, because there's a lot in the Misery book where he explains exactly what he's doing with the novel, but from a different perspective, and it's so clever, and I just loved it, and I loved it in this as well. So some of the other characters, Danny is really interesting to me, and I talked in Salem's Lot about the fact that Mark felt like he was written way older than his age, and I do feel the same way about Danny in this, but honestly it actually works a lot better in The Shining for me, because Danny is known as having what is called the shine. So he is able to see visions of the past and the future. He's able to know things that he shouldn't know. He can read people's thoughts and emotions, and he has this like kind of disposition to supernatural abilities. So that kind of makes sense to me why he would have a more mature way of viewing things, and it worked a lot better in this So I really loved Danny. I think that he is a great character, and it's really nice to see things from the mind of a child who doesn't quite understand. And he just loves his daddy, and he just wants him to give him his approval and show him his love. And no matter what his dad has done to him or what he sees happening, he cannot accept that his father is the monster of his nightmares. He just wants to be able to make them be a happy family and love each other. And it adds this really sad and heartbreaking feeling. Wendy as well, I'm really loving. I feel so sorry for Wendy, honestly. She is just such a sad character in this novel because she wants so badly to believe in Jack, and she loves her son so much. She's a very smart, educated woman. She's very strong and capable, but she is just being dragged along at the games of other people and of her husband. And despite everything, her son just is gravitated towards his father, and she's always kind of left out. But she has this fear that her jealousy, and it's a very natural feeling to have, to be jealous of that, her feeling of jealousy will turn her into her mother, who was a very spitefully jealous woman who would constantly make actions that would hurt other people because of her jealousy. So Wendy is just dealing with all of these huge emotions without really any way of changing anything. And that makes me so sad for her. I think she's great. She's a really cool woman. She's had a really terrible go of it, to be honest. And I just feel really sorry for her. So that's my feeling about Wendy. I also was so happy to see Dick Halloran in this. How fun. I recently watched Welcome to Derry, and there's a Dick Halloran in that show. I had conflicting thoughts about it. I'm not going to go into it too much here, but part of me was like, it's really cool to be back in Derry, and then part of me was like, this doesn't feel too Stephen King, to be honest. It felt a little bit strange. So yeah, I wasn't too sure about it, but I was happy to see the character Dick Halloran, and he had these kind of supernatural abilities in it. And at the end of it, he was like, oh, I might go to this hotel, the Overlook Hotel, something like that. And I was like, wait a minute, is he going to be in The Shining? And then he is. And that's great. And I'm super happy about this. And I love him. I think he might be one of my favorites, even though we only saw him for a short while. But he also has The Shining, and he takes it upon himself to give Danny some advice and really look out for him and give him this grown-up talk whilst also offering an adult presence and a comfort and reassurance to this small child, whilst also saying that, well, if it ever gets too bad for you, then you can come to me and I will be there for you. And I just love that. He didn't have to do any of those things, but it was like this almost kinship that he formed with this young boy who he noticed had the same abilities as him. What a selfless guy. I just love him. Absolutely love him. So we're just going to talk about a few plot point thoughts that I had before I go back to reading. One of my first notes that I made is that I'm predicting a huge fire to engulf the Overlook, because I feel like that boiler is just too much of a Chekhov's gun to not go into. So I'm expecting a big explosion at the end of this. That's what I'm thinking. There was also a line in it as well that I tabbed when Jack is inspecting the boiler, and he says, Jack felt a sudden shiver cross his back in a hurry and thought, the goose just walked over my grave. Then Watson gave the pressure wheel a spin and dumped the boiler off. So surely Jack is going to die in this explosion as well, right? That's what I'm thinking. Also, what is red rum? I'm really annoyed that I haven't figured out what this is yet, because it keeps coming up, red rum, and I don't know what it is yet. I have a few thoughts. So the word being red rum, I'm like, okay, so that can kind of connotate violence and alcohol, potentially, because we've got this idea of seeing red, and rum is a type of alcohol. So is it something to do with Jack's inevitable descent into violence and madness, and maybe he's going to start drinking again? Maybe it's that. I liked the fact that it pointed out red drum, and they did say it's not red drum, but the fact that they pointed it out made me pause. And I know that in his visions of the future that Tony is showing him, oh, remind me to talk about Tony because that's a whole separate thing. There's this sound of like booming as the hammer goes about. So is that kind of like a drum? Maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah, I really want to know what that is about. My prediction as well is that they're all going to be dead by the end of it, because I feel like that foreshadowing of telling us about the previous family is a way of explaining to us that this is what's going to happen. I've already told you, so don't expect otherwise. And I'm really sad about it. But yeah, I expect that Dick Halloran will be the only one left alive at the end, and Jack, Wendy and Danny are all going to die which sucks. I really want Wendy and Danny to survive, and I don't think that they will. So yeah, I'm expecting that. But let's talk about Tony for a second, because this is one of the creepiest parts of this novel. So Danny has like an imaginary friend, an invisible friend, who is not actually an invisible friend. It's like this older boy who I think they describe as being maybe about 16, who comes to him and he never sees his face, but he comes and he shows him things. And the way it's explained, I don't know if it's because Tony is such a like normal name, but it's explained that Danny from a young age has just been like, yeah, Tony came and showed me this. Yeah, Tony came and told me this. And I'm like, if my 3-year-old child came to me and was like, oh, Dave has come and told me that there is a mouse in our basement, and I went down there and there was a mouse, I think I would lose my mind. Tony creeps me out so much. Like, why does he keep coming? Why does he keep showing this small child all these like really horrifying things? Maybe he's trying to like warn him in a way, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like he is subjecting him to these horrible images and terrifying him. And when it happens as well, he like goes into shock and he faints and starts kind of hyperventilating and stuff. Anyway, just the whole thing about Tony is so scary to me. I hate it. I don't want it. I did really appreciate as well that we've just recently got some backstory about Jack's upbringing and how his own father was very violent and angry, but he loved him up until a certain point, and it's kind of almost repeating itself. And there was a bit in the flashback of him remembering his father where he says, take your medicine. And this is what we've been seeing in the visions of the future when Jack is going to go crazy. So now I'm feeling definitely more like the hotel is polluting him and manipulating him with his own traumas. Like, I suppose the last thing that he wants to be is a reproduction of his father, and so the hotel is almost turning him into his worst fear. So I don't know if I need to give Jack a bit more leeway. I'm not sure how much is within him and how much is the supernatural, but I think it might be both. I think it's the combination of both. Like, it was always there within him, because before he even came to this hotel, he was still doing crazy stuff and he was drinking and being violent like his father was. So it is still there, but it's just being kind of exploded by this force. And again, that's really scary, that something will come and take all of your worst impulses and your fears and your insecurities and your traumas and twist them and turn you into the very thing you never wanted to be. That's horrifying. Honestly, how can you get a better horror than something that does something like that? This is like a psychological horror and it's terrifying, and King just has done it so well. I am blown away. I'm so impressed. Plus, I haven't even talked about what I've just read, which is Room 217. Oh my God, Room 217. I understand why it's so iconic now. I'm never staying in Room 217 again. I refuse. And it was terrifying and horrifying and everything I wanted it to be. And oh my God. Why is the vision of just a specific room in a hotel having something within it just so horrifying to me? I don't know, because it's like there's so many rooms, they're all the same, but just this one is corrupted. There's this really eerie feeling about it. But yeah, the woman in Room 217, terrifying. So I think that's going to be all for this update. I am going to finish this and I'll come back to you with my final thoughts when I finish. So I have finished The Shining by Stephen King, the second one in this video, and let's talk about the ending. I was wrong about some things, right about others, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it so much. Everything I talked about in the first update just continued to be true. The depth of the characters, the scariness of it, the building of the tension, all of it was fantastic. We got to see Dick Halloran again, which I was so happy about. I just think that Stephen King is so good. I'm so happy that I read this. I don't feel like there's anywhere near as much that I want to say now as I did at the midway point. There's just a few things that I want to go over. The first thing was them not leaving the hotel. I know that it was really hard for them to find a way out, but I feel like I wish that Wendy would have done a little bit more proactively rather than kind of relying on Jack as their only out, because at this point he was clearly compromised. She clearly knew this, and I feel like she kind of should have taken things into her own hands a little bit. I was wondering though, because the hotel has kind of infected all of them. So even Danny, his shining has gotten much more intense since he's been here, and it's kind of powering the hotel as well. And obviously with Jack, it has brought all of his worst impulses to light and is kind of using him to get to Danny. And I was wondering, like, I wonder if Wendy had any impact as well, because she is also existing in this place. And Dick Halloran said that all mothers have a little bit of the shine in them. So it's never actually acknowledged that she is being changed too, but I think potentially she is, because I feel like the Wendy that we end up with, where she witnesses Jack hitting Danny once again, and then she continues to sleep with him. She continues to think the best of him. And also she leaves Danny alone. And I just don't feel like the Wendy at the beginning of the novel would have done that. And there was a lot of conversation about family dynamics of abuse, where you have a violent father and you have a timid mother who doesn't protect the children and kind of just allows it to happen and doesn't do anything about it. And obviously Wendy stayed for a long, long time with Jack, even when he was an alcoholic, until eventually she decided, no, enough's enough, I want a divorce. And I feel like she would have gone down that same route, but instead she kind of was just explaining it away. I mean, at one point she did like get a knife and was gonna kill him, but I don't know, there were just a few choices in here, and then it made me think, I wonder if it is infecting her in the way of making her more tolerant of Jack's behaviour, and this maybe was one of her flaws early on, and it might have been exasperated in that way. So I just wonder if that is something that is a possibility. At least I think so. I thought that the pacing of this was so fantastic. I'm so glad we got to see Dick Halloran again, and I'm so glad that I was wrong about Wendy and Danny not escaping. They did, and I'm so happy about that. I continue to really enjoy the conflict of Jack's character and how he turned full homicidal maniac, and it was as scary and horrifying as I thought it was going to be. But he still had those moments here and there when his paternal love almost shone through, and we saw that with the snowmobile. He is trying to find them a way out, and he kind of knows this is their last chance and this is his last chance, but something inside of him is telling him to destroy it and make sure they can't leave. And then he looks out and he sees Danny in the snow just playing innocently as a child, and it almost kickstarts his brain again, and he goes, no, I need to save him. But then it doesn't work out in the end. And there was another moment as well when he was going after Danny and he was about to murder him, and he just kind of came back when Danny was questioning the monster, whatever it was, the presence, and saying, you're not my dad, I know that my dad wouldn't do this. And then he comes back and is like, Ryan, you need to save yourself. And so I appreciated the depth and the care almost that was put into his character from Stephen King, because he wasn't just a straight up he's been used and he has to be taken care of. It was like he tried, but ultimately he was not able to succeed. And I just really appreciated that. There was a really good commentary on writing as well in this, because we had another author character. So, you know, Stephen King will love to throw in a little anecdote about writing. And the one in this was about having to like every one of your characters, even the most despicable and evil, because it is not up to a writer to place the moral judgment on their characters. They have to just present them as they are and leave the judgment to the reader. And I think this is such amazing advice, and it makes sense why Stephen King's novels are so impactful, because you're not being told anything. You're not being pointed in a direction. You are just being presented with information that you get to decipher. And I think that was brilliant. I had a real love-hate relationship with Jack by the end. I felt sorry for him and I was sad for him, but I feel like it was meant to go this way, and he was meant to go up in the blaze that took down the Overlook, unfortunately. I was also just getting annoyed at Stephen King because he kept giving me false hope, like, oh, they're gonna get out. No, okay. They're not. Oh, they've locked him up. Oh, okay, he's free. Like, it just happened over and over again, and I was like, oh my god, like, I'm already tense. You don't need to make it worse. But yeah, it was really great. Definitely some of the characters annoyed me in this, where they just kept doing stupid things, like Wendy going down and cooking a full meal instead of just grabbing loads of stuff from the pantry and then going somewhere else. Or she goes to check on him and she's like, Jack, are you okay? And then he like jumps up and grabs her ankle and is like, got ya. Oh my god, that was absolutely terrifying. But I was like, why would you go over there? You already know he's too far gone. You can't do anything. Ugh, it stressed me out. It turns out that Tony is a good person, I suppose. Seems like it was Danny looking out for himself, and I quite enjoyed that concept. I was actually kind of glad that Tony wasn't evil in the end. I think that was a nice little twist because, like I said, he terrified me for most of the novel. So I liked that he was on side. You kind of saw a glimpse of that when Danny was saying, Tony can't come to me anymore. They won't let him. So you kind of saw from that he was on side. But yeah, interesting. Also, we found out that red rum is murder backwards. I can't believe I didn't get that. I'm actually in shock that I didn't get that, but I'm glad I didn't get it because when the reveal came, I was like, oh my God, no way. So yeah, that makes sense now. All my theories were a bit too wild. I should have just tried to think a bit more simplistically, but I still think what I said had merit. Anyway, I loved the ending. It felt right. It felt good. And I found as well with Stephen King that his endings are always much more optimistic and hopeful than I think they're going to be. The characters might not end up unscathed and it's not all lovely and happy and everything's wonderful. They're changed and they're traumatized, but it seems to me that there is a happy ending in a way for all the novels I've read so far. And I actually really appreciate that. I might start going in a little bit more optimistically because I was just totally convinced it was all going to end in a terrible, terrible tragedy. So yeah, I'm so glad that Wendy and Danny got out of this. The whole thing though, it was just so intense, so thrilling, so readable, and I loved every second of it. I also made a little bit of a note that I thought potentially there's an interesting class commentary going on here. I don't know if I'm reaching, but the whole premise of the Overlook and everything that happened felt a little bit like a class commentary because it almost promised you all these things, used you for its bidding and pushed you towards addiction, and then you ended up tossed aside with no reward by the end. And it just felt a little bit like a class thing, especially because Jack talks a few times about them not being in a higher class and other people around him getting away with things and just being able to do things. So I do think there's something to be said about how maybe people from more poorer parts of society are used and abused and pushed into things that they didn't ask for and they never wanted, all for the sake of trying to be rewarded or trying to provide, and end up just being the ones ultimately to suffer. I think that came through in this novel. That is The Shining. I absolutely loved it. The Shining is going to be getting a 4.5 from me, which puts it tied with Misery and above Salem's Lot, but out of the 4 novels of Stephen King I've read so far, they have all been rated above a 4 stars, which is absolutely crazy. I know I've read some of his most famous popular works, but I still think the fact that I loved each one of them for different reasons as well is really incredible. And I cannot wait to read more. The next one that I'm going to be reading is Carrie, his very first novel, which will mean I have read his first 3 novels and I'm very excited for that. I've always wanted to read Carrie because I love the idea that we have a female protagonist. I know it's very mixed media, and obviously I know the story of Carrie, but I've never fully gotten into it, and I'm just really excited. Also, there's a 50th edition been published, and it's so gorgeous. I feel like I need to buy it. I just want it on my shelves. So that's going to be the next one that I read. I'm loving going through Stephen King's bibliography. It's been so much fun. I know there's also kind of a second part to The Shining. Is it Dr. Sleep, I think? And I looked it up after I finished, and I believe it's something to do with Danny as an adult. Is that one worth me reading anytime soon? Should I just keep going and picking up random novels that take my fancy? Like I say, I think Carrie will be the next one, but most of the time I just go in a bookshop and I go, yeah, I want that one. Let me know, should I read Dr. Sleep anytime soon, or should I get a few more out of the way before I get to that one? And what recommendations do you have for me to read next from Stephen King? I definitely want to read The Stand at some point soon because I love post-apocalypse and I think it will be very timely, but I know it's another big commitment, and it's also another one of his massive novels. I don't know if I should keep going through his biggest novels first and then move on to the more obscure, lesser known ones, or if I should kind of try to go in publication order, or if there are just some that I should just pick up here and there. But let me know, what is your favorite Stephen King novel? Which ones do you recommend that I read next? And which ones should I avoid for a while until I've read a few more? I know the Dark Tower series is a big one and I can't wait to get to it, but I definitely want to get at least maybe like 10 to 20 of the King novels out of the way before I get to the series. But yeah, that is going to be all today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope this video wasn't too long for you. Please like, give me a comment and subscribe if you want to see more from me, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye!